Okay, everybody. We just started recording the meeting so we can get to talking here. We currently have a good number of attendees on. First, I want to just do a brief introduction. So if our current medical student panelists want to say hello, just say your name and maybe where you're from.
Sure, I'll start. Hi, everyone. My name is Anais. I'm an MS1 here at UCLA, and I'm from LA, born and raised.
Hello, I'm Kimi. I'm an incoming MS1 at DGSOM, and I was born in Cameroon, but I'll call Seattle home.
Christian, you want to?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Rashid Al-Ananza. I am an incoming MS1. I was originally born in Jordan, but I call Boston home.
Hi, everybody. Christian, first year at DGSOM and the MD PhD program.
I'm Wes. I'm also a first year, and I'm in MD PhD with Christian, and I'm from San Diego. So we're glad you guys could come and be a part of this panel, and we're glad everyone who's here. We are going to be recording the panel, so you can, either if you want to review some of what you had, you're welcome to not take notes during this, and this will be put up later, or if you want to tell your friends about this being a resource, it'll become available. So as to get us started, we have a set series of questions. So I'm going to just start asking our panelists, and they'll be giving us their thoughts on MCAT studying tips. Our first section is going to be choosing the right tools and setting a plan. So first question, how did you go about choosing the right study materials and resources for MCAT prep?
Different books. So I just got 3 books. And I think that there was Kaplan and the other one. What's the other one though? I forgot the other name of the other one.
Princeton?
Because I took, yes, Princeton. And my friend was like, are you trying to excel? Or are you trying to do well? And I was like, I want to do well. And if I need more time, I'll look into it. So I focused on Kaplan and then just briefly ran through Princeton, but I used Kaplan mostly. And UWorld, a lot of UWorld.
I can follow that. My recommendation is to either set, I think, has the same information, they just presented a little bit differently. But there are also a lot of free resources that I use, like Jack Weston. They have free questions for cars, and we'll get a little bit deeper into that, obviously, with the more in-depth questions. But I think doing a review for about 2 months on those books is very helpful, and then starting to started doing practice questions after that.
I guess I can go next. So in terms of like how I chose the resources, I think it really depends on like where you are at now in terms of like your content knowledge and what kind of what your background is. If you have like a bio background, if you don't, you're like a completely different major. It all really depends on that. So doing research kind of helped me narrow down like what prep company or what books I wanted to use. So I also had Kaplan, and then I used Exam Crackers as well, because Kaplan gave you like a really in-depth content review, and then Exam Crackers was more condensed. If you notice, the books are like thinner, so they're more like condensed info for people who are already, let's say, good on content, and they just kind of want a refresher or review. So it really just depends on how you feel about how much content and how much you want to review. So I took the exam twice. So that also depends on, if you're a retaker or not in terms of what books you're going to use. So I used like Kaplan the first time and then the Exam Crackers the second time.
Yeah, so kind of going to be echoing a lot of what my peers said. So I also work haven't actively been working this year, but for one of my gap years, I worked as a MCAT tutor. So I've worked with, quite a few students like through the process, and generally through like the company I work for, what we recommend for students is one set of books. Generally, I think the 2 best are probably Kaplan and Exam Crackers, echoing Anais. Like Kaplan's a little bit more comprehensive, Exam Crackers a little bit more condensed. UWorld is huge, so definitely getting practice questions in. And then, of course, like the AAMC's like official content is probably the most like critical resource, and within there's like nuances as well. And then I'm a huge fan of the MCAT subreddit, and that was kind of like my go-to page for the summer. And now I'm like a bona fide Redditor after my MCAT summer. So I also recommend that. Yeah, you're muted, Wes. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I would say I agree with really all of that. I think one thing that I'd highlight from my experience is just having access to practice tests. I think that's already been said, but just my take and what I tell everyone, you want access to like 10 plus practice tests, because if it's pretty high yield, even if you just do that without a lot of other guidance, it'll get you in the right mind state for it. So that's my take. I'm going to move us next to maybe we'll do one or two people answering this. But if yours is really distinct, we'll definitely talk about it. What was your daily study schedule like when preparing for the MCAT? How many hours per day did you study, and how did you avoid burnout? I'll also actually, the next question kind of fits into this, so I'd love people to talk about it too. The next question is going to be, how far in advance of the test date did you begin studying? Let's mix that in a little bit. I think it kind of helps answer the first question.
I can start. I think for me, depending on what you chose for the exam. So I always chose the 7 a.m. one. So I was always up at like 5:45. And instead of doing one thing at once, I would do 2 hours of bio, 2 hours of biochem. So that way I'm always doing something new instead of just focusing on the same thing. And then to avoid burnout, I work out. So definitely like having a hobby will help you just take your mind off of the MCAT. You definitely don't want to just be thinking MCAT all the time. In addition, obviously, like spending time with family was really helpful for me. But being able to invest at least 2 hours for each independent section was helpful for me. And that's how I avoided most of the burnout, because I didn't want to be doing biology all day or cars all day. And that's basically my take on my daily schedule. So about 8 hours or so. And yeah.
I would say I think I was definitely burnt out because I think I was working full time while also prepping for the MCAT. And I would not recommend that if you could avoid it. And then my mom also got surgery. So there was a lot of things happening in my personal life that took a huge toll on my MCAT studying. But I think that I had set a good schedule. So I was working East Coast hours, but I was on the West Coast. I'll be done with work by 1 and then start studying like at 2:30 till I usually would go for like 5 hours a day, because I think my goal was 20 hours of studying at least during the weekday, and then during the weekend I would maximize doing more like 10 hours a day each, depending. And for other things that I will do to help me minimize my burnout, I think I watch a lot of videos of students who were where I wanted to go. And that just brought me so much joy, because it was like, well, it sucks right now, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I also went to a lot of concerts. I'm a Megan Thee Stallion fan, so I went to like a concert when I was studying because I had to. So just trying to also see friends who were not into medicine and just getting me out of that space a little bit was really nice. But yeah, I think having a good schedule helped to track my work and making sure I have like wiggle room in there to make sure you give yourself some grace, because you know it's hard to sometimes follow a schedule to the T.
I think that's when we'll maybe talk a little bit about more in the future. I want to move us forward just a touch. Our next question is going to be, how did you balance MCAT preparation with other responsibilities during the summer? How did you manage to remain motivated and focused during your preparation time? We've already talked a little bit about it, but
This might sound kind of cliche, but I watched a lot of motivational videos. So early in the morning, I just put on a motivational video, and it's like, if you want to work hard for it, you have to get it. Nothing comes easy. In terms of balance, for me, I did research during the summer, so that was my job. And I basically just let my boss know that I'm going to be working part-time. So I invested about 30 hours into my job, and then I tried to do 8 hours, 5 days a week, and then split it up on the weekends as well. So that's one of the things that I was able to do. In terms of the other thing that I would do for motivation is just watch students getting into medical school. and students who honestly struggle with the MCAT. I personally struggle with the MCAT, especially the car section. That was the worst. Probably one of the toughest experiences of my life. I am not an everyday reader, so that was very difficult, but being able to utilize Jack Weston, I'm going to say this again, Jack Weston is probably one of the best websites you'll ever come to find. They just have free, unlimited practice, like practice passages for cars. And you guys should check it out for sure.
I can talk a little bit
I
about
guess.
my,
Okay.
I
Okay.
I studied for the MCAT when I was working out. So I was working full time. And I think it was already mentioned, but balancing with that is a real challenge, especially because you might be getting burnout from work. I think something that was also brought up is like other things happen that you don't expect. You can plan everything out really well for your MCAT studying, and you can just have something happen in your personal life that really affects like your mental state or even just your free time. So one thing that we slightly talked about, I want to bring up is, you know, how far ahead would you plan to take, start studying before the MCAT? And I think it's really important to consider you want buffer space there. You can do really well in a free amount of time, and buffer space is great, especially if things are going well as you study, because then you just kind of chill towards the end. I know right now we're focusing this on a summer session, and so we'll make it high yield to doing it in the summer. But also just consider this if you maybe decide you want to do it during the school year, because summer is when you want to do that research internship you just got, or you want to volunteer somewhere like on the East Coast, maybe. I would say starting as soon as possible is great, because even if that, it seems like, okay, I just, finished, or I finished this block or quarter or whatever, or semester, we're used to med school blocks. It's great to just get into it while you're kind of still in the habit of studying. Like, you can ease into it, and it'll let you ease out of it a little bit towards the end. So that's my big recommendation too, is no matter what you're doing, if you're working, anything else, give yourself more time than you think you'd need, because that way when you're stressing, and I remember stressing right towards the end and being like, oof, like, did I prep enough? I don't know. But I had a few weeks after that point where I was like, yeah, okay, cool. That was what I needed. Like, there's a point you hit, and then after that you start feeling really good. So give yourself as much time as you can, and also, if possible, understand that you don't have to take the MCAT at the time that you wanted to take it. Like, it's okay to maybe put it out a year or till like the winter season if you're doing summer, if it's feasible for your overall timeline, which I think is generally you should consider more flexible than you wanted. I changed my timeline a lot. And I think that actually eases things. Don't procrastinate on it, but give yourself a break. Like, do it when it's best for you and when you're going to do the best. If any of you guys want to add more, feel free, or I might move us to our next one, which I think is going to be our high yield section.
I actually do want to say something for just the timeline. I would recommend at least starting 6 months before. And what I noticed is there's a difference between knowing something and being able to apply it. You might know the books back and front, which is great, but having the ability to decipher what the passage is asking and recalling that information and applying it is different. So if you start at least 6 months ahead, do 2 months of content review, just reading the books and doing the practice questions at the back. And the rest of the time you should be spending just practice questions, do at least one MCAT a week, and then once you're done with the MCAT, take a break the next day, go back and review it. But for cars, you should review it the same day, because you want to remember why you put a certain answer. And what I did was I put an Excel sheet, and I would put in the question, what I answered, what the correct answer was, why I thought it was that answer, and then just try to understand what the miscommunication was. So definitely knowing something is different than being able to apply it. But I think at least 6 months ahead is a good time to start. And then just to echo on what my colleague was saying, don't rush it. If you have to postpone it, it's okay. But don't procrastinate, obviously, but do not rush it. If you have to postpone, it's absolutely fine. You don't want to be stuck in a scenario where you're rushing to take the MCAT and you're rushing to applying, and then you're 1 year behind, which is what happened to me. I tried to rush it, but it wasn't a good idea. I ended up taking the MCAT twice.
I think kind of just adding some nuance. I would say in terms of like timeline and duration, what matters most is like your starting point, and then also like how much you're studying per day. So in contrast to my peers, I was studying full time. So during my gap years, I was a high school teacher, so I had the summer off. So what that meant is I was studying full time for a shorter amount of time. So I think I probably studied for maybe like 9-10 weeks, and then took the exam. And it was my first time, and I'm also kind of just like again, in contrast to like pushing back, I'm a huge like planner. So like starting college, I kind of had like my 5-year plan, and fortunately, like I was able to stick with that. But I think it's just about like more so than like following what anyone else is doing. It's about being able to reflect and assess your specific like conditions. So like if you only need 2 months, great. If like you reach that point and you thought you were only going to need 2 months, but you're not done with content, or like things aren't going well, then like have that kind of like self-reflective point and be able to course correct accordingly.
I just noticed a couple questions in chat, so I will be answering those throughout, and you guys are welcome to as well, panelists. I'm going to move us to our next section, which we talked about a little bit, and I think is going to be really kind of a bulk of what people are going to ask about, and that's study techniques and test taking strategies. So our first one, can you describe any test taking strategies that you found particularly effective? Did your strategy change depending on the specific section? And then our little sub to that, and I think everyone's going to want to hear about it, is can you share some tips or strategies for tackling the car section?
I guess I can start because I myself had these same exact questions when I was taking MCAT both times, because I was just, frantically searching the net for people's success videos and, to see what everyone's strategies were, and how people did on the car section in particular, because I myself was really struggling with cars. I also am not, a daily reader. So cars was just a different beast that I had to tackle. And I was just, frantically searching for answers. And the common denominator of all, like, the research that I was doing was that honestly, there is no like black or white answer. There is no real recipe. And it's really just personal. It's very personalized. Like what works for you might not work for the next person on this, panel, and, so on and so forth, because I might be someone who studies in the mornings versus someone else might be, more effective in the evenings. I might be someone who likes to write all the time versus someone else likes to like excel their whole, study whatever questions, or they like to do whiteboarding. So it just really depends on what works for you. But I think the one big thing that I learned throughout my 2 attempts, and the one thing that really helped me boost my score like 8 points from the first to second try, was really just my mental health, and kind of just scheduling breaks and planning accordingly in order to be able to, replenish myself after each like practice exam, or after each week of studying, so that I could just keep going. Because I found that like constantly telling myself that, oh, I wasn't good at cars, or I don't know how to read, or whatever, it was just getting to me even more and more, and just making me either take too long to read, or, just not understand. It was really just my mental health, I think, for me personally, because I realized that the second time around I was more relaxed. I was taking more breaks. So I wasn't as burnt out. And so I was actually able to like improve my car score. I was able to improve the overall score. So that is something that worked for me, as well as just taking a lot of practice exams and focusing more on AAMC's material rather than like third-party companies. Because like while they're good, the third-party companies are good for, content review, I think like they vary a lot in their practice tests. So one company might be either too hard or too easy and kind of destroy your confidence, or boost your confidence confidence like falsely. So I was more reliant on AAMC's material. And then I would intersperse that with like third-party resources like Altius, because, you know, again, I went and did research and I heard that that was most representative. If you do other research, you know, they can tell you Kaplan is more representative or whatnot. So it's just like conflicting info throughout the web. And so the second time around, I did less research because every time I would just be getting conflicting info. And I just did more like kind of self-care, meditation, and all those things, and more practice tests, and then heavily focused on AAMC materials and actually did them like twice through to kind of see their logic, because they're the ones writing the test, not Princeton, not Kaplan, not anyone. So essentially I saved those AAMC material for like the later end of my studying, just so it was closer to the exam. So I did those, I think there was 4 or 5 practice tests at the time. I did those like either every week or every 2 weeks, depending on how you schedule your time. And I actually did them twice. So that was just kind of my way of going about it. I'm sure everyone here has like a different story because again, it's so individualized. There is really no right or wrong answer.
I'm going to talk a little bit about mine just because in some ways it's a bit opposite. And so I just want to highlight that is that I liked to not use the AAMC and use a practice test that was harder, or not harder, but like was the one that Anais was mentioned that you might get a lower score on. I personally just like that. And so also remember that like it's like you can work the way that works best for you and your confidence. For me, that was confidence boosting because I felt like I was pushing, you know, the harder exam. So when I came into the AAMC and I'd intersperse AAMC exams, I would do better. So I just want to mention that that's a really, like, you do want to focus on what works for you. And if you like representative and just knowing where you're at, then AAMC is great. And for some people, you might feel better having harder ones. So definitely like look around and see what is what, and like actually ask yourself how you like to take practice tests and see what you want your scores to be like. Do you mind seeing, like, is that going to break you down? Because if not, then that's great. But if so, then also don't do it. Burnout is very, very real.
To piggyback on that, I also did try the harder exams, but I found myself overthinking a lot of the questions when I switched to the AAMC ones, because it is they are a little bit easier than, like, for example, the Princeton review. They're notoriously known for having their hard car sections. So just be careful when you switch over. Sometimes on the AAMC, the answer is just simply stated and you don't have to overthink it. For cars, I would say be prepared to change your strategy. Don't be afraid to try out different strategies. Like when I first started, I wouldn't read the questions. I would sometimes rank the passages. But I also found it useful to just read the questions first, have an idea of what they're going to ask me about, and then go ahead and read the passage, spend about 2 to 4 minutes on the passage, and then like 3 minutes answering the questions. One other thing is that be prepared. Like, it's okay to not get questions correctly. This is an improvement strategy, and the mentality, as my colleague said, is very important. Like, you have to tell yourself that I'm going to be okay, that I'm going to do well. Like, you can't just convince yourself that you're a bad reader, because at the end of the day, this exam is a psychological exam, because they first give you the Chem Phys section, which you have to utilize everything that you know. And then when you switch over to cars, you can't use outside knowledge at all. So you have to be comfortable with that switch, saying, I'm going to pretend like the passage is the only thing they give me. Like, I had one of the passages was about Freud, and I learned a lot about it through the psych-social section, but, you know, on one of my practice exams, and then I was answering questions that were outside, like I was bringing outside knowledge, which wasn't good. So just to continue on that, be careful with the switch if you do decide to use the harder exams.
And I'll just say, for me, cars was definitely the worst. My score was just keep going back and forth. I just didn't know what to do. But I think one thing that I realized was it really depended on how interested I was in the passage. If it was about history, I would just be like, no, I'm not going to read this. But it's about like politics or anything sciencey, I'll be like, oh, this is interesting. I'm actually enjoying reading this passage. So I think that was one thing about getting excited about the passage. Like, okay, I want to give it a try. I want to actually pay attention and I want to give it my best. And I think sometimes, so what I ended up doing a lot was reading a lot about history papers, just like reading random papers and trying to find interest in reading those. And also sometimes I think when you look at the answer, I think I would usually just be like, oh yeah, this makes sense without really looking at the other ones. And it's really good to like read all the answers and see like what are the differences. Sometimes it's like only or always or except. Those little words change everything. And those were really frustrating to me. But those are things you have to pay attention to, I would say, regarding the cars. And I don't know, I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of just, honestly, I think there's a lot about like how the passage is given versus, you know, depending on what you're into, how much knowledge you have about them and, you know, your reading skills too. So it's clear that if you have a higher level of reading by the time you start, you're going to do better than someone who is like working on just the speed of reading and everything and just based on how much English you know already. I think one thing I would say is also focus on increasing your high yield. Like I think the psych session, that's something I wish I had done a bit earlier. It's really easy to maximize your point there. Like if you do a lot of UWorld, a lot of just like, there's this like reading that I found on Google Drive and you just do that, you should be fine, right? So I think there's little things like that versus like reading the whole physics books, it might be like 20% where you might not even really get all of that. So like if you want to maximize, focus on those first, I would say. And I think that, yeah, but I think the cars is really just read more. I would say just keep reading, keep diversifying the amount of reading you're doing, just not focusing on one type of like reading content, short passages, long passages, a lot of questions, short questions, and spend time a lot reviewing why you were wrong. That's something that I wasn't doing as much, but actually understanding why you were wrong and why the right answer was the right answer. That takes a lot of time and sometimes it's frustrating, but I think it's definitely worthwhile.
Also something about cars because I had a strategy that I felt worked well for me in cars. I know it's one that a lot of people, you got to figure out what works for you. One thing I would recommend is trying in cars and really in a lot of the sections they teach this, but I think I found it effective in cars is you really use that highlight tool. And don't just use it to like highlight things. I would take section tests on cars. You can get them from UWorld or if you use a service, you can get AAMC ones, and I would have like a dedicated period, not on your first one, but after maybe 1 or 2 like weeks of studying and practice tests, etc. When you're kind of just used to everything, and you just do this, and you go through cars, and what you do is you read the passages and you highlight things that you think are going to give you the right answer. A lot of the educational materials in Kaplan, Princeton, etc. online, they talk about there's going to be tones, themes, etc. buzzwords, always negatives, maybes, things like that interspersed either in the paragraph or in the questions, the answers themselves. And I think if you do some practice where it's not even just about the reading, it's just about look at it as if you're looking for answers, always just look for answers in the paragraph or in the passage before you get to the questions. I found that for me was a high yield, both test taking strategy, but also practice strategy because right cars, you just have to like read more, whatever. It's really hard to, some people like tangibly work with, okay, I just need to read more. I read plenty. I like to read books, right? And maybe you'll just do well with cars, but maybe you read a lot and still struggle. Try this. It's a bit more analytical and like focused in the way you dissect the passage. It really helps you practice the highlighter tool, which is actually useful in a lot of the other sections. You might find yourself really just doing it throughout the test. I personally use it. And the point of it is you make yourself predict what's going to be either a good thing that gives you an answer or something to stray away from because you go, this is pretty buzzwordy. They're either going to give me a right answer with this, or it's going to be a wrong answer and be trying to trick me because I see this mentioned. I think if you divide up your cars passages like that, and every time you see a question, you go back to where you highlighted, it keeps you in the right mindset to find the right answers and keeps you away from all those incorrect answers where they're trying to trick you. It also just makes it quicker to reread the passage because you kind of remember, you have little check marks throughout, little like flags. So try that. And maybe also 2 things I want to mention as just moderator right now. 1, please feel free to shoot us questions in the chat where I know we're doing a lot of talking and hopefully it's being high yield, but like add questions to our chat. We'll try and answer them. We have a couple of us who can answer. And 2, a lot of this might not stick with you very well because you haven't taken an MCAT yet. You don't really know what it's like. And so we are kind of tossing some things around. Feel free to ask questions about what we're talking about. Like I'm talking about a highlight tool. That's something when you take a practice test, you'll see you can do highlights, et cetera, throughout. There's strike throughs. We know that the MCAT is this intimidating thing and it's a challenging thing to study for. And so especially right now, you might not be familiar with what the sections are, what like it really means to do some of the strategies we're talking about. Feel free to ask questions. And again, this will be a resource that's later available. You can just review it again at a later time, and maybe it'll click more after having done some practice. So I just want to throw that in there. Don't be overwhelmed by this. And I'm going to throw our next question here. And that is going to be, did you have any advice, or do you have any advice for taking full-length practice exams? How did you analyze your performance on these exams? We have a little sub question after that. How did you structure your full-length practice tests to mimic the actual test conditions? Take us away.
The first time I took a full length, I think my focus was more on don't fall asleep, answer all the questions and get it done. It doesn't matter if you get them right, but be able to actually be present while you're doing what you're doing. So I think a lot of time, I think for me personally, I had a hard time just being, and I noticed when I was looking at my score, I did really well at the beginning and just keep going down based on how much energy I had. And when I would get to the psych section, I was just like out and I didn't want to read anymore. So I think just getting your body used to being sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours, it's something that you need to get used to at the beginning. So the first time you take maybe a test, yes, try to do well. Just don't click and then move on. But make sure you are also working on your stamina. I think that's the thing. And the second thing I would say, even when I was studying, I tried to implement that a little bit more, where when I study 8 hour long, I'll do like a 1.5 hour, take a 15-minute break, 1.5 hours, take a 15-minute break. So just to mimic the type of studying that I would be doing on the MCAT, I would say. And the questions, setting up an exam, I think depending on what tool you're using, they help a lot. I think with UWorld, you can just click, I want 56 questions, or I want this amount of questions, and they'll just make up a test for you. And you can just click all the sections and just make up a test. But a lot of them also come with already preset full-length exam that you should take. But I recommend saving those for the end. But while you're studying and you want to have more practice, I think you can just, if you have a UWorld, I don't know what other things I mostly use UWorld for those. You can set those exams for you so that you have an idea of how many questions you should be answering and how long those should be taking you. But yeah, build that stamina at the beginning will really help you. And having people take the exam really helped at the beginning for me, having two friends in the same room, so that when we took a break, we could just like talk a little bit. That helped me a little bit stay awake and stay alert. Yeah.
I can follow up on that. I think for the practice exams, the best thing you can do is try to mimic your actual exam as best as you can. So that means taking it at the time that you're supposed to take the exam. So if you have it scheduled for 8 a.m., make sure that you're starting at 8 a.m. You're not taking extra breaks, and just pretend as if it's the real thing. And and take your breaks. I know I have friends that didn't take their breaks. I think it's important to take a moment to yourself, take a deep breath, and be able to move on from one section to another. In terms of the structure, I think one of the things that helped me was when I take a full exam, I look at my score, but the only section I would review on that day is cars. So I would again do an Excel sheet, write the question down, what my answer is, what the correct answer is, and try to justify why that's the correct answer and why my answer was wrong. Or if it's correct, I'll tell myself like, good job, like great job, you're doing better. Just having those little comments, and then I would take the rest of the day off. The next day, I would go back and review each questions, even the ones I got right. I wanted to see like what other choices were there, what other choices I was stuck between, or is there a reason that I could have chosen the other one versus this one? And I would basically review Chem Phys, Biochem, and then Psych Soc on Sunday. So I think reviewing all the questions, even the ones you got wrong, would be very beneficial, because you're also just going through that information and you're reiterating to yourself, like, what the amino acids are, for example, and you're going to get a lot of questions on those. So just mimic it as best as you can, but also give yourself a break and try to review every single question that you got right and wrong.
I would agree with that. I would say I personally didn't do the cars right after. I did the whole exam after. Either I do the whole just one day of all exam, or I would just not do anything that day and do the exam the next day. But I think that strategy is what I tell everyone. It's the most high yield thing.
So I also just want to piggyback on what everyone else said. I basically mimicked the exact, testing situation each weekend that I would do the practice tests. I even tried to use like the same snacks during like the breaks that I would ideally use during the test day. And then if I saw that something wasn't working, like in terms of snacks, like if it would like put me to sleep in the next section after eating that snack, I would change it for the next test or practice test, just to kind of test my energy levels as well. So that's something like I was experimenting each time during my practice tests, and then finally like figured out what I was going to do on test day. And then I did it, like the few times before the actual test day. I would start right on time, like 8 a.m., do the exact like times, time slots, and then the breaks exactly on point. I would be isolated, like in a room, away from family or friends or whatnot, and just focusing on the test that day. And then I personally just took the rest of the day off to relax. And I started like fresh the next day to review, the entire test. Yeah, that was my strategy.
I'm going to take us to our next question. And I think those are all, I agree with everything that was just said. I did a lot of it. So our next question here is going to be, did you participate in any MCAT study groups? If so, how did that impact your preparation? I did not.
Honestly, I did not do any like prep companies. I don't know if that goes into study groups, but I personally didn't use a prep company. I also didn't do any like study groups. I personally just learned best like on my own and through like the third party resources or whatever, just doing it like on my own. And I thought the prep companies were just too expensive, like $3,000 to $4,000 for something that you eventually end up like kind of doing on your own. So I didn't use those either, but I don't know if anyone else has a different idea. I think the one thing that I did find helpful was just like private tutors here and there for like specific sections that I was struggling with, like cars. And I just utilized it for like a few sessions. I find them like on Facebook or whatnot in those like MCAT groups, just to tackle like specific questions that I had, because I thought like going to like the prep companies was more like standardized and not like individualized towards what you're struggling with. So that's how I approached it.
I have experience with a prep company, so I'll tell you guys what my review is. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I would say it did not help me. That Princeton course did not help me because the way this is structured is that this is structured for hundreds of people who are trying to take these classes at once. You are unique in your own learning strategies. So, you might want to spend 2 months on a section that, the Princeton is only making you spend like 4 weeks on. The first time around that I took the MCAT, I actually did take a course, but I personally would not recommend it. I think just doing your own thing, learning on your own and your own strategies would be a lot more helpful, especially for the car section. I found it that in conjunction with the AAMC, there's a Kaplan like sheet where they talk about specific words, like for example, furthermore. If somebody makes an argument and they say furthermore, they're adding to that argument. If they make an argument, say but, they're sending something else, or they say consequently. Like watching for those keywords, I found it on my own a lot more helpful. In terms of the groups, I think Reddit is good enough. If you have any questions, just to join a Reddit group and say, hey, like, what do you guys recommend for this? But also having a friend that you can explain things to, if you're a visual learner, obviously would be very helpful. But I would not recommend paying thousands of dollars for a course that's structured for hundreds of people when you can do it on your own.
Yeah, I didn't do anything while studying for the exam. But like I mentioned, I work for a broad tutoring company now. But it is kind of what like Anais was mentioning, so it's a more like one-on-one service. If it's something you think is like helpful and you have the resources for it, because it is, this company, but companies in general are like pretty stupid expensive. I don't see why not. But at least for me, like I probably wouldn't have been able to afford that when studying. So definitely possible with like whatever resources you have available.
I will just say I had a friend with who I was studying. I think we were not like studying together. We will just like meet up to review questions and make sure we can explain it to each other. And it was also a good way to keep me accountable, because I think there were days where I would slack off and he was just like, I just got done reading chapter 3. And I'm like, oh crap, I need to get on it. So having someone to keep me accountable was really helpful. Because I think I'm the kind of person who just works as hard as the person next to me. That's just who I am. So I need to have people around me to keep pushing me. So having that friend was really nice. We'll just meet up and then do questions together 2 to 3 times a week. And also having someone to share that journey with, because sometimes I feel like it's pretty lonely sometimes, and you don't have other people with whom you can talk to. So it's nice to have someone who you can have those conversations. And Reddit is fun, but Reddit was overwhelming for me sometimes, because I just, you want one answer and you just get a lot. And sometimes I'm like, okay, this is a lot. So it's not just have that one person with whom, especially because we took the same classes, so we had a similar explanation as to the background of why the answer was what it was supposed to be. So that helped a lot.
Our next question is, how useful did you find flashcards or similar study aids in your MCAT prep? Did you use any specific apps or platforms for this? I'll real quick interject. As a new med student, we use Anki a lot, ANKI. I didn't use that in undergrad, but I mean, it makes med school pretty easy. I would 100% recommend it for the MCAT. It's very easy. It's very low effort studying. I think if I had that for the MCAT, it would have been so much easier. I think there's a lot of MCAT things that are just recognition, like psych socials would be great for it. So any flashcard app that you like, I'd just recommend Anki as one. Probably makes certain aspects of like studying for the test really, really easy.
I can follow up on that. Anki is also very helpful. It is very hard to use, but there are a lot of YouTube videos that can help you like choose the settings and how long the latency period is between each question. But definitely Anki was very helpful in my opinion.
I think I kind of wasted my time making my own cards. So it's like, I wish I had used Anki, but at the time I didn't have enough time to get into Anki. So I was just like, let me get out of here and just use the cards. And I also bought the Kaplan flashcards. So those are the ones that I will just walk around the street, just going through them.
I'll move us to our next question, unless either of you guys want to say anything about flashcards. How did you keep track of your progress and determine areas that needed more focus? A sub question to this is, how did you approach studying for the sections that were the most challenging for you?
Sorry, could you repeat that first question?
How did you keep track of your progress and determine areas that needed more focus? I can talk about that.
Yeah, go for it.
Just quick, I think part of it is when you take your practice tests, you'll see your scores. I think you'll see your scores, but also it's like how much did you struggle? Think about, like if you went through a practice test and you did well on it, but you're like, well, I kind of guessed, or that was hard. It takes you back to the whole full length review is to go through, like, did you know that answer? Do you know why the wrong answers were wrong and the right answer was right? But I will say, I think it's fairly easy, and that's one of the good things about MCAT setting, is to kind of see where you're at. If you're taking, your exams, it's just, does your score improve in the sections? And if you had a section that was lower than it usually is, did you think it was harder than usual as well? And maybe why? Maybe you'll see it was in Chem Phys and it was a lot of physics that you haven't brushed up on. But overall, I do think the MCAT's a pretty easy exam to kind of track your prep for, because it's very numbers readout sort of thing. And so that's a benefit to studying.
Yeah, I'm kind of echoing a lot. So I feel like practice exams and kind of doing like a meta-analysis, which is what some of the other folks have mentioned, is definitely key for keeping up with like progress, both within like the 4 sections, but also just like within the subsections of that. Like if you're consistently seeing that you like keep on fucking up on all the amino acid questions, kind of tells you that you need to go hit the amino acids. Or if like for me, for example, I pushed off psych soc until quite late, probably like 2.5 weeks before my exam. So before that, I was doing not poorly, but like, you know, I was scoring pretty average on psych soc. But you know, once I started like focusing on that, I would see my score improve. In terms of focusing on like, or what about the subject I struggled with the most, I answered this in like the typed Q&A, but I like hate physics. I hated physics. I still hate physics to date. But fortunately for me, it's like the lowest yield topic on the entire exam. So I looked at the specific numbers, and there's around 15 questions on average per test, which is, you know, like 5-6% of the test. So I kind of just like saw what was coming up on my practice exams. I mentioned some of that again in the written response, but usually it's like some optics or fluids or like thermodynamics, thermokinetics, which also overlaps with chem. How that stupid Doppler whatever equation will come on there 100%. I think it's on like every exam pretty much. And you know, that was enough to kind of get me by. And then fortunately, chem is probably one of my strongest subjects. So I mentioned earlier, I was a teacher. I was a high school chemistry teacher. So you know, the fact that those two were paired worked pretty well. But you know, if it's another topic that you're struggling with, I think something like kind of a common pitfall is we like, as like human beings, we like knowing things. So we can often over focus on things that we're already pretty strong on, and then push off things that we are weak on. So it's kind of just like about combating that and forcing yourself to study the thing that kind of sucks. Because if not, then, you know, you're going to push towards your exam date. You're going to be like, oh shit, like I have all this to study still. And it's, you know, I have 3 weeks to my exam. And then that's not a good position to be in. So just like really forcing yourself, if there is something that you're struggling with, to like devote the time towards studying it.
I definitely agree with that, because I found myself liking, for example, the psych and social section. So it was more fun for me to do that section. But because I was struggling with, let's say, cars or physics, I kind of had to force myself to do those sections first, like earlier in my day, just because I'm more fresh and I'm a morning person. I like to study in the mornings. So I would start off like my study sessions with cars every single day. I was doing passages in the morning. That was like the first thing I would do in my first 2-hour block of studying. And then I would do like my little break and then come back and do like everything else. So just really forcing yourself to do the sections you don't like or you're weak in, just because you need to improve those sections, is really the key and the way to go. And psych and soc is the, you know, kind of lighter / easier section. So also just not like slacking off on that either, because that can really help boost your score. So kind of finding the balance, I think, is the key between doing like your favorite sections versus your weaker sections, because you don't want to let go of like that easy points, and then you also don't want to ignore your weak spots either.
We have 2 more questions on here, and then we'll also open it up to just kind of like free for all, any advice you guys want to pop off. So let's get through these real quick. Can you share any last minute tips or strategies that helped you in the final weeks and days leading up to the MCAT?
I would say take a break. I mean, like review the little things that you need, but take a break. You know, I was always just like, if this is the only day that I have left that's going to change my score, I don't think it's going to make that much difference. So enjoy yourself, relax, think about what you're going to do after the MCAT, and then briefly review little things that, you know, you're still maybe unsure of. But I would say don't take a full length that week. Maybe others will say take it. I will not take it. And just enjoy yourself and go see the site where you're going to be taking your exam. Make sure you're familiar with it, familiar with the route to get there. your snacks are packed, and you have the family support that you need and people who are cheering you on because you're going to do great and you're going to be there to celebrate afterwards. So
I would say a couple weeks before, definitely utilize the AAMC, and you should just focus on their materials because they have also freestanding questions that you should be answering. And I would say a couple days before your exam, you should take a break. You don't want to, cook your brain a couple of days before the exam, trying to, input as much information as you can. The best way to do it, as all my colleagues have said, is, spaced repetition. And, just stressing yourself for that extra day is probably not going to make that much of a difference. So take a break, enjoy some time with family, go rested to the exam, try to sleep as best as you can. Personally had a hard time sleeping, but try as best as you can. And definitely just, give yourself a pat on the back, because if you put in that much effort and that many months into the exam, that just shows dedication, and that shows your effort to do well. And I think you all will be just fine. When I took my first score, I didn't even crack a 500 on my practice, the first one, but I used that as motivation and I improved by a lot. So good luck, and I think you guys will do just great.
The last question, and I think we talked a little bit about it, but this one's important, is what are your tips for managing anxiety on test day? I have one that kind of, I'll just talk a little bit about what I do, and it's going to be different for everyone. But I think it was mentioned early on that you want to take your practice tests like they're a real test. So I'll go back to that a little bit. Just when I was doing practice tests, I would even have some Saturdays where I would get up and I would drive the distance. I'd be driving to the testing center, or I would drive to the testing center in the morning, even earlier, and then drive to a library or even drive home. I think simulating like that you aren't going to be studying right before, like a lot of the days you get up early, you're going to study, just kind of knowing your day is going to be a little different and you're going to have to commute, whatever it is, to get to this place. It'll change your routine. So I think practicing having that disruption in your routine can really settle your nerves, because you kind of go, okay, cool, I know exactly what to expect today. It's not a different day because it's test day, it's the same day. The same goes for prepping your food, knowing what snacks you're going to have. Honestly, having a song you play in the car on the way there, and having plans for after. I think people forget about that, but if you can have plans with your family or friends, or just like know you're going to go get your favorite dinner, or like, for me, I'm from San Diego. I went and got my favorite California burrito from my favorite taco place that was by the beach, right? Which, like I did the things that made me excited for the day and feel comfortable with the day, and made the day something to look forward to, even though it was like really tough and it was burnt out. And I was just like, okay, like it's done, but it's done. And you don't have to feel like you're like everything's over. It's not. The day keeps going. You're done at like 2 or 3 o'clock. You have the rest of your day. And I think you can really turn that into a fun thing where you do the MCAT, you got through it, you've done your best, and then you have something to look forward to. I think that really helps with the anxiety, because there's just more to the day than just your MCAT.
yeah, I will echo that. I think my friend and I had a whole like party the night after, the same night we were going somewhere. So we were planning it. I hadn't seen them in like a month. So I was just super excited about hanging out with them again, and just, having that to look forward to was exciting. The second thing I would say, I think most of my friends that I was talking to who had been through it were just like, they just gonna be another day. Just go take the exam and go home. Like, it's whatever. Like, don't stress out about it. Like, it's just another practice exam. It's practice exam number 7. Like, just go take it and go home. Don't question it. Like, don't think about it. Just, be good at it. But just like, it's just another practice exam that's just gonna be graded. That's it. That's how I took it. And I think like Wesley was saying, putting yourself in that mindset, driving there already, having gone through those practices over and over, when you get to it, it's just another practice exam. And just go with it. So I think removing the layer of like, oh, this is the one that's going to count. To be fair, when I left the exam, I was like, can I retake it? Even if it was fine, I was definitely stressed out. But I think Yeah, just it's another practice exam. You're going to do well. If you've been doing well on your practice, it's just another one. It's just a reflection of what you've been doing so far. So yeah.
I think the way to tackle the anxiety between moving from one section to another is to just remember that whatever section you just passed, it's done. There's nothing you can do about it. Don't let whatever questions that you thought you got wrong mess you up for the next section. Once that section is done, take 3 deep breaths within those break that you have and say, there's nothing I can do about that section now. Let me focus on the next section and completely just pretend like you didn't take that section as best as you can. I think it's important to stay focused. It's important not to get hung up on the past, because technically if it's 1 minute or an hour away, it's in the past. There's nothing you can do about it. And I think another thing, again, to echo, is take your breaks. I know some people don't, but take the breaks, walk around, drink your water, relax, and pretend like you're going into a new section. So just stay focused and remember that once the section is done, it's done. There's nothing you can do about it. Just focus on the next one.
Yeah, on the note of like just a random side comment that came to me. Minimize, I think the goal is to like minimize predictable stressors. So, a lot of the things mentioned kind of fall in that vein. So like, driving to your test center and being familiar with that commute and so forth. Something that came up for me that was like super unexpected is so you obviously have to present ID. My ID I had gotten when I was like 15 or something. So my signature on my ID no longer matched my active signature. So when I signed, the lady was like, your signatures don't match. And I had like a really interesting like panic attack. And I was like, ma'am, like this is like 10 years ago. Still me, I just changed my signature. Can I take this exam? And then I had to like try to like re-sign to like match it as much. Like she let me like try again. But it's just like not a fun situation to go through. And just like one example of kind of like a more predictable but like unpredictable stressor. So just kind of try to plan all that out as much as you can, and everything will go as smoothly as it can.
Make sure your ID is not expired. Bring 2 forms of ID just in case.
Kind of closing in on the end here. If anyone has any last minute questions, shoot them into the chat right now. I want to thank all the panelists for being here. I mean, I would have wanted to go to this as someone who's prepping for the MCAT. So thank you all for your time. I don't see anything popping up in the chat. We'll give it another minute. If there's any last minute things you guys want to mention, I think we said a lot, and I don't think we need to say too much more aside what was already said. You guys are going to do great. The MCAT's hard, and you can do really well on it. And also, it's okay if you get stressed out while studying for it and taking practice. Everyone does, but we're all here. We're all in med school, and you're gonna have practice tests where you don't do well, and you're gonna feel stressed before you come to the exam. But that's okay, and it's a hard test, and everyone takes tests like that differently. So also don't feel like any differently if it's for you. You're just feeling challenged on taking it. And I just saw a Q&A. I like this Q&A question. What's the best break snack? And I see we got some answers, but I'm just going to say, I like the trail mix without chocolate, like just nuts and fruit. I thought that was good. Lots of good brain food. And yeah. So everyone put your answers to that. That's a fun one if you guys want.
Something with a low glycemic index so you don't have a sugar crash.
First thing-
Hydrated.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, I'm just gonna say stay hydrated and keep, remembering to breathe during breaks, stretch, breathe, hydrate, and then maybe some like power fruits like blueberries, bananas, walnuts, whatever it may be.
B&Js, I think those those were really good. I really like those. Just don't try that on the day of the exam because you might be a little bit more thirsty. Just make sure that you can handle the sweet and the whatever the peanut butter has in it. So
Yeah, that's true. Whatever it is, don't try on exam day. Sorry, go ahead.
Also suggest pee during your break. Even if you don't feel like it, I would say try to pee as much as you can so that you don't feel the urge while you're taking your exam. And then yeah, just peanuts, I guess, for snacks. But I didn't take that many because I was worried about falling asleep.
Also, actually, one thing, if you can avoid it, avoid peanuts, because someone might have a peanut allergy there. Nuts are great, but some people have really severe peanut allergies. I had that was something we talked about. Things like that, if you can avoid, maybe unless it's your favorite snack. Some people you don't want someone to have a reaction on their test day. Okay, everyone.
Sorry, I was just gonna say one more thing. I think that try to spend some time at the beginning finding the resources that you're gonna be using and stick to them. I think when you're 2 months into it, and then people are like, oh, have you heard about this, that? I wish, and then you spend so much time trying to find all of those. I think at the beginning, find a couple of things that you are I want to focus on those and maximize my, my intake in these. And the rest is good to know, but I'm not going to be just trying to know everything. There's so much resource out there. You might not be able to go to all of them, and you don't have to. So focus on the one that matter to you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, both our panelists and everyone who attended. This is going to be recorded, and I hope you all have a good rest of your evening, and have a great week. Bye, everybody.
Good luck.